Three, two, one. Welcome to Let's Talk with Hart Hagen, and I'm joined by John Leary. I also have a panel of guests in our virtual studio. And John, thanks so much for joining us. How's your day going?
It's a great pleasure to be here. It's been a long day. We've been checking in on projects, planting trees around the world. So happy to join you this evening.
Let me give you a proper introduction. John Leary is Executive Director of Trees for the Future, where he is focused on helping end hunger and extreme poverty for rural African farmers through the revival of the forest garden. John has extensive experience living among the rural poor in sub-Saharan Africa and deep knowledge of international development, agricultural development. He speaks 3 languages and has worked in 13 developing countries. John has dedicated his life to creating innovative training approaches that empower farmers to rise out of poverty, including award-winning programs that are currently in use throughout the developing world. Another thing that's true is John Leary has been in my earbuds for 2 days.
Oh, fantastic.
And that's not the first time I've listened to your audiobook, and I also follow along with the Kindle. John, thanks so much for joining us. And
we
were talking about how it's really kind of unbelievable how many different things trees do. And I want to ask you about that, but tell us a little bit about your experience in the Peace Corps and how that evolved into you being Executive Director of Trees for the Future.
Sure. A number of our staff, especially our Americans who based out of our Silver Spring office, have served in the Peace Corps, and mostly East and West Africa. And so I'm happy to work day-to-day at Trees for the Future with a bunch of returned Peace Corps volunteers. And the service is 2 years, 3 months. And as usual, was very kind of life-changing for myself, and also, gave most of my team a good direction and gave them something that they really got excited to be passionate about and something that they could pursue. In my own experience, I was in Senegal in West Africa, and I saw poverty, I saw hunger, I saw deforestation, but through my experiences there and working with the other volunteers and seeing what other people and organizations are doing, I saw that we can end poverty, hunger, and deforestation in so many different contexts. And with that, there's all kinds of other great benefits that'll come from that. And the solution is agroforestry. It's unleashing the power of trees. Where I was stationed, and oftentimes Peace Corps volunteers will be involved in some type of tree planting project in their community, I was focused specifically on agroforestry. So helping farmers improve their lives and their agricultural systems by planting trees was my job description. So I got my foray into agroforestry, and since then, I've helped plant well over 150 million trees. Trees for the Future is approaching 200 million here very soon. And I've been able to work with thousands of families around the world, exchanging information and coming up with new ideas.
Well, John, what would you like for people to know if you had, a worldwide platform and you could tell people anything? What would you most like for them to know? And then how are people responding to your message?
Sure. With our experience in witnessing the drivers of deforestation, as tree planters, we've had to clean up a lot of messes. Hillside erosion, land degradation, desertification. There's all kinds of really challenging situations. And the biggest cause that we've seen time and time again is the world's #1 cause of deforestation, and that's agriculture. It's our food system. It's not necessarily a logging companies or paper or other products that also do or burning firewood and other uses of trees. We do see these other drivers out there, but the top one above and beyond everything else is the agriculture and farming systems. And so understanding what we're eating, where it's coming from, and the impact it's having, I think that's something that people really need to know above and beyond everything else.
One of the more fascinating things to me about this is water conservation. It's like trees help conserve water, And, you know,
Sure.
you described a situation where Egypt is at the mouth of the Nile River and Ethiopia is upstream from them and Sudan is upstream from them. There's a scarcity of water. You have all this contention over water rights.
Hmm.
And you probably recommend that people in that watershed should have forest gardens. So
Sure.
why is that the case, and what can people do? And maybe how is that the same or different from what we should do in North America?
You know, it's pretty similar as you look at the land degradation that's happening all along the banks of the Nile. A lot of it is because of the monocropping of a small handful of cash crops and other types of staple crops that farmers are growing. And those patch patterns look very much like something you would fly over in the Midwest, and you kind of see up above and you see all the different kind of patches of crops that have cleared the forests and made way for the crops. In the off season, in the dry season in Africa, wherever you farmed something, it's not kind of summer, winter, it's dry season, rainy season. So you grow your crops in the rainy season, but after you harvest and you're in the dry season, it's completely exposed. It's totally, you know, uncovered land. And right now, throughout the United States, we have this mega dust storm that has swept across the Sahara Desert. It's come across Senegal, exactly where we're working, for the lack of any type of cover. It's being swooshed up into the air and it's coming all the way across the Atlantic. It's filling the Caribbean. It's in the lungs of everyone from Texas to, I don't know if it's reaching Chicago or if it's coming back to the East Coast, but it's massive. And at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's the cropping systems that are clear it, intensify, deplete, destroy is what's, whether it's the erosion on the sides of the watershed of the Nile or whether you see the dust storms coming. I think you can liken this same farming system to the fires in Brazil that are also being cleared for soy and maize farming patchwork to go in there as well. And you know, here in the United States, one of the challenges that I oftentimes point to in terms of the result when everybody across the landscape is doing the same monocropping type of system is really, as you look at the Mississippi water system, you see how much fertilizer is coming through it, and you see the growing dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which is also gets a lot of the livestock manure that's helping to feed the plankton. But it's like whether all these different water systems, you know, and hydrological systems are being impacted on a massive scale because all of the farmers across those landscapes are clearing the trees, reducing the landscape's ability to drive water down back into groundwater aquifers. The cleared land is making runoff more possible. So whether you're having runoff problems in Ethiopia and you got extremes from dry to wet, or whether you've got all this runoff problems, you know, in our hemisphere as well. So the forest garden solution and integrating agroforestry in this helps in a number of different ways. Water is one of them. By having, when we work with families, we'll oftentimes, before we get into the juicy questions of how can trees improve your household nutrition, how can they help you make a lot more money, what can you sell, and we have all kinds of great species we work with avocados and citrus and mangoes and guavas and papayas and all kinds of different things that can bring a good price in market. Before we get into all the, you know, the exciting fruit trees, we look at the erosion in the field, and we figure out every drop of rain that falls in a farmer's field, we can use rows of trees and contour strips of grasses and things like that to capture every drop of water and make sure nothing runs off. You know, again, that closed system idea that we talked about just a little bit
John,
earlier.
most of our participants have a fairly advanced knowledge of plants, and I think we would enjoy hearing what are some of the plant species. Like if you were going to plant a forest garden, to pick a region that you're most familiar with,
Sure.
and what species would you plant starting with the trees, and then what function do those serve in terms of livestock fences, et cetera, and then what vegetables and the like do you plant amid the trees, and how does all that work?
I'm so happy to be with you all here. This is so exciting. So generally speaking, so there's two things. So you do, I'll jump quickly to the types and characteristics of trees you're looking for. But in our consideration, it's not just what would be ideal there. We're working in places across arid sub-Saharan Africa that are so dry that when a place has been deforested, the sun is now beating down on it from sunrise to sunset. And so even though you might want to start with fruit trees usually evolved with a little bit of shade around it. It got pooped out of a bird or a bat or something, a fruit bat, and kind of grew up under a mother tree, and they don't mind but when you've got a place that's completely deforested, then you have to pick the trees like pioneer species that don't mind 12 hours of really, really hot sunlight beating down on them. And you got to start with that first wave, and then you can come with the second wave underneath them or within the protection of them as well. So it's just some of the fun considerations. But we'll always usually start with fast growing leguminous trees that have some type of seed pod. And in the US here, we have honey locust, black locust type things that are somewhat fast growing. Usually they'll have smaller leaflets. And so if it's got the pod on it, then it's a good chance that it might be a leguminous tree that's nitrogen fixing, and it's got the, mycorrhizae fungi in the roots, and it's got some processes that are improving the soil through the roots. The leaflets are small. Usually they tend to be somewhat small. So when the tree is either through the leaf litter, or we're always finding ways to harvest the branches and mix the green stuff down into the soil, the small leaflets serve as a good kind of fertilizer in that way. We pick trees that are highly compostable. So, and like when you prune it, two will grow back. We like this kind of, compostability of a tree so that you can keep harvesting branches out of it, wood out of it, leaves out of it, or whatever you're trying to harvest from your rows of agroforestry trees.
What does compostable mean?
So when you kind of cut it, it grows back. And when you compost it, you're gonna cut it at about 1.5 meters tall, and keep kind of chopping it so it'll kind of, or pollarding might be another word that some people use, and it's just different ways to kind of shape your trees and get.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Sure.
when you start with something that's completely arid, and in your book you said desertification doesn't have an altitude or a particular climate. Desertification can happen anywhere, but when you start with a place that's especially arid, you have to pick trees that will survive that. And then when you plant enough trees that can survive that, then maybe they're able to shelter other plants. And am I on the right track with that?
Exactly. Yeah. The organic matter and the moisture in the soil is usually what you're looking at, and we don't measure that, but we know that we're trying to increase the amount of organic material in the soil through the compost, through the leaf litter. Those are all helping the soil maintain nutrients and also moisture and keep it immediately available. The trees also serve as a windbreak. So the windbreak is going to reduce the transpiration, the evaporation of as the wind comes across. It slows down the wind. It also dampens the intensity of the sun, and it'll be several degrees cooler in the understory of a forest garden. And that makes a huge difference. So if you're in a very extremely hot area, like Sudan or Chad, if you take pioneer pigeon peas and grow those up, and after a few months, grow your tomatoes have a chance of doing very well under it. But without the pigeon pea cover, those tomatoes are just going to get broiled, and super intense.
How long does it take to start to see results, and what are some of the results that you start to see once you make that investment, once you take a chance and plant some of the right trees, and then what do you see happen over the course of time?
Sure. It takes us 2 years to end hunger for a family, and it takes about 4 years to lift a family out of extreme poverty. So in the first year or two,
And before I'm going to let
yeah,
you continue that story, but
yeah,
I don't want too much time to go by to where you give your contact information and what people can do to help. But go ahead
sure.
and tell us,
No, I
let's
appreciate it.
start. What are the results that you see?
Sure. You know, we have integrated in the forest garden, you've got the forest, you got the trees, and then you got the garden. And as soon as you've protected it with this thorny or thick fence around, living fence around the edge of it, we'll start working on helping farmers plant things that they can either get they can immediately sell, or they can eat in the near term. We do gardening, we do perma gardening. We also have some fast growing bushes and trees like papayas and pigeon peas and other things that, coupled with some vegetable gardens, start to give families something to eat or sell or trade within 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And then your papayas and your pigeon peas come on. By 2 years, 3 years, you have another set of species. The cashews will start to fruit, and other things will start to fruit. And then by the time it gets to 3 and 4 years, that's when your mangoes are going to come online, and citrus probably by year 4, year 5, depending on the variety. So in total, after 4 years, we can take families who are earning less than $1.25 a day, and we can take them to $4 or $5 a day. So that's the 4-year impact of going from farming one crop in a monocrop and doing the trees around the edge, fruit trees in the middle, perma garden. But the benefits start rolling in the first year. And we have collected over 6 million data points using a technology
That's not very many.
now our team is out in the field and proving and reproving. And we've got, you know, have really shown how by diversifying food systems, we're improving people's health and nutrition. And that's the opposite. When you're just doing the one crop, it's not good for anybody's health. It's not good for the planet. When you diversify them with a lot of fruits and vegetables, it's better for the growing system, and it's better for families' health.
Share your contact information and let us know what we can do to help. We will repeat that later on in the show. And then I want to ask a couple of questions from our audience.
Absolutely. So you can find us at trees.org. And there you'll find a number of different ways to either donate or start a campaign. We've got educational information. We've got ambassadors who are helping us out online. People are finding ways to donate everything from cars to, you know, so please introduce us to as many millionaires or billionaires that you all may know. And we have a lot of business partners as well that support us in different ways. And so if you see the companies that provide apparel or shoes or socks or watches and wine and other things, there's other ways to support us indirectly. We have apps. There's a forest app that people use to stay focused on life as well, and other app partners too that have found ways to plant trees with us. So you'll oftentimes see the Trees for the Future logo at the store, at an REI store, at Whole Foods or something like that.
Let's take a couple of questions. We have Phyllis and Justin have asked a question. I could read those, but Justin, could you ask your question? And then Phyllis, you'll have to take yourself, I'll unmute. There we go.
Sure. Great to meet you, John. This is really interesting. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay, 2005 to 2008, and I really saw the transformative power of agroforestry as well. It wasn't the exclusive thing I did, but basically as a Peace Corps volunteer, you're just a problem solver. And so my wife and I were problem solving with farm families for 3 years straight. And agroforestry was an important tool in our toolbox. But it's a bit of a paradox for me, because what seems to make it work well in the Paraguayan settings are things that make it really challenging to apply to the U.S. very industrialized agricultural system, or even small family farms in the U.S. Because of two things. First is that most Paraguayans are primarily subsistence rather than market-based farmers. So sure, they grew some crops for market, but the primary production was for household consumption or consumption by their animals. So trees provided lots of sort of slow benefits to the farm families and their animals, and eventually maybe marketable things too. But it's a very long-term investment. And the second thing is that most Paraguayan farms are small scale, non-mechanized, they're fairly diversified. And that's just not the case. These things are not the case for most US farms. So I know that agroforestry is being applied in more contexts like we see here in the US. I'd love to hear you talk about how we make that work. How do we make these sort of slower investments in trees work in the US context?
Yeah, and I think one of the underlying things is labor, and really looking at the labor. Until we get some mechanized systems, I could imagine, well, let me start over. So I think one way to approach farmers is looking at their pain points. And for the US farmers, I think if we were to look at how much money they're putting into chemical fertilizers and how much that's taken out of their bottom line, if there were runoff expenses that they did have to incur cash out of pocket, then the agroforestry might help in terms of water conservation or runoff or something like that as well. But I think looking at that, so for fertilizers for many farmers, and really as we look at our feed industry, the animal livestock industry, I think looking at feed replacement. So input alternatives is one way to, it's not the full forest garden system, but it's one way, because farmers are always looking, especially, your American farmers looking at a spreadsheet, and they're looking at, what's going to either increase or decrease my profit. I think helping them reduce costs by integrating trees into a system that's going to give fertilizer for free. So we have a good program in Kenya right now that's working with a dairy cooperative. And you can imagine that corn-based dairy feed has a pretty big carbon footprint. It's expensive. You got to buy it. And, well, for our farmers, we're showing them how to, for every head of cattle, you can grow 500 agroforestry trees, these fodder trees. And there's a lot of nutrients in the leaves. There's protein. There's a lot of things. And so we mix that with some of the field crop residue. And all of a sudden, farmers no longer have to buy the cattle feed anymore. And they have more milk to sell. So more milk, more money is the slogan for the program. And there's been some minimal research on that. And, and there's a lot of sugar and there's a lot of protein and there's a lot of energy that you can get out of different types of tree-based livestock. So I think for the US, finding those, if it does have to be an economic argument to convince US farmers to adopt, I think that's where you look at first, Justin, is to kind of offset their costs and offset their inputs. If you can help them diversify, oftentimes as well, when I visit farms, usually the border or the perimeter is underutilized. It's the place like just before the tractor turns around of sorts. Well, in our program, we found a way to make the border as one of the most valuable parts of the land. And so by, I don't know what a raspberry thicket or a blueberry, or a wall, windbreak or something like that might enhance. I think with big agriculture, you're right though, it's difficult, Justin. The other day I ran through some scenarios with the class where we were really saying, I think the easiest thing is we're thinking of farms in our county here. And we have a lot of pick your own, and we got
and you're in
farms.
Virginia?
I'm in Maryland. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm in Montgomery County, Maryland, just north of DC. So we're just where the DC point is. Our county's just next to it along the Potomac River. And we have a lot of pick your own. And I think working with those farms, those family-owned farms is an easier place to start. They're looking to diversify income throughout the year. They would love, we do the same thing with our own family-owned farms. And that's you shouldn't have one payday a year. You should have a payday every month or several paydays every month, even better. So for your average pick your own, they're trying to do Christmas trees in the off season and wreaths and honey and pumpkins and berries and apples, and people who do want to think in terms of diversification are going to be
John,
an easier audience.
we're looking for alternative economies as we try to get off of fossil fuels, and we have these fossil fuel companies, petrochemical companies, pipeline companies, trying to say, coal companies saying this is the only way to have jobs. We're looking for alternative. It sounds, you're describing something that to me sounds like, pick your own sounds like would be good for the economy. It's kind of a tourist destination. You can always add other little things for people to do, that kind of thing. Am I on the right track with that?
You know, it's hard on jobs. I think we do need to look at that, because what I would pitch for the U.S. Food economy and our food system that we have here is a couple things that I really, really appreciate, that having learned kind of from food systems abroad, I think it works. I think it's the future. And one is the CSA I belong to. And every Wednesday I get a box of fresh food from a local Maryland farmer or a collection of farmers in Maryland and Pennsylvania. And I get that every Wednesday. And I set the menu for the family for the week from there. And it's local, there's minimal plastic. I'm connecting more directly with farmers. I do not pay capital O organic prices. I pay lowercase o organic prices for it. And I think, you know, technology can help a lot with this, is connecting us consumers with farmers who are growing things more sustainably. My farmer, Andrew, who does the lion's share of the stuff, he doesn't have to pay for an organic certification, but he's also like, he doesn't use pesticides. He doesn't use anything nasty. Another thing I would throw out in terms as a good model is we have a restaurant around here called Sweet Greens. And when you go into, it's largely a salad place, but they could do a lot of other things as well. And like a lot of other places now where you go in and you kind of go through and pick what you want. When you go into their place, there's a chalkboard on the side that tells you exactly which farm everything in the bar has come from. The chicken, the eggs, the salad, all that stuff. And it tells you which farm in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, or Virginia it's come from. So just kind of in the immediate region. And they too have mastered, they do it on a much larger scale. It's a good large, they have great business, and they figured out how to buy local.
As soon as we wrap that up, let's let Phyllis ask her question.
Yeah, no, go right ahead, Phyllis. Yeah.
Okay, so I visited several African countries, but one of the striking things that I noticed, well, in South Africa and Kenya and Tanzania, was that the diet seemed to be mostly mealie meal.
Yeah.
And I remember asking people who lived there why they didn't add tomatoes to it or why they didn't add some kind of bean to it. And it was a matter of just preference. So corn, mealie meal, is not a complete protein,
Right.
which obviously was going to cause a lot of malnutrition. And I'm wondering what kind of luck you had trying to get people to raise things that were going to make them healthier.
Yeah, yeah. You describe the exact problem, and when people say it's their preference, I think it's because that's what they know and that's what they grew up with, and that's not necessarily what we would recommend for our own grandkids. But that's, we run into that, and I've heard that, oh, the farmer likes maize. Yeah, but I'm a father, and you know what? You eat your fruits and vegetables, and you eat colorful things. And the colors is a good way that we've been hammering on it through our training program. The maize-based diet, the mealie meal, the corn-based diet, ends up you're lacking a lot of vitamin A, and so we see a vitamin A nutritional deficiency across Kenya and across most, countrysides where people are largely just eating maize and maize-based products. Orange things have vitamin A, sweet potatoes and carrots and anything that's got like a nice, good orange color. There was a woman who won a World Food Prize in just for kind of promoting orange, fleshy sweet potatoes. And we've diversified beyond the sweet potato itself. And we've also diversified beyond the orange. And so what we're doing to try to keep the messaging simple is that in the dry season and in the rainy season, we're training people how to make sure that they're growing all colors of the rainbow in their garden. Red things, orange things, green things, white things, purple things. I'm colorblind, but even I can kind of figure out that, there's red things and, tomatoes, and you got to mix it up, and beets and whatever it is, but just try to have multiple things in each color category so that they're available in the household. Yeah.
Did you have luck getting them to eat them?
Yeah. So it's not everything everywhere, but in East Africa, we have great winds with greens. because there's enough of a mchicha history that's kind of a chard or a kale type thing that it's easier to add different greens that people might enjoy. In Senegal and West Africa, we're lucky that the local cuisine is rich. If you get, you know, the rice and fish, it's already, the cuisine has and takes a lot of vegetables in the dishes. And so we're lucky. I have been to other places like Rwanda, when I worked in Rwanda, and it was just such a starchy diet. It was a potato, a sweet potato, and a plantain or something like that. And, you know, getting away from the starchy ones was difficult. The families are always interested in making money. Usually your high value horticulture are things like very nutrient rich things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, are things that people are inclined to start growing often because they fetch some of the higher prices in market. And so the maize is oftentimes like a poor man's crop. Like nobody ever gets, no African farmer gets rich doing maize. It's just as very much subsistence, just trying to fill bellies. If you want to go from $1 a day to $4 or $5 a day, you got to get out of the maize business and you got to get into the high value fruit and vegetable business. And so what we see tracking dietary diversity scores is that there's the trickle down from more diversity in the market gardens, because not all the tomatoes are sold, and some of the lettuce, gets eaten, and you know, some gets consumed, and some goes to market too. And there's a bit of a blend in there. So,
John, another question that Phyllis asked: how important to agriculture are native trees as opposed to non-natives?
Yeah, you asked about species earlier, and I didn't mention, but I'm happy to kind of bring it back up now. In agroforestry, what you'll tend to find is some of the best trees came from either Central America or India. And so when we talk about native, if you go back enough hundreds or thousands of years, some of the best trees have been brought in. The same goes with fruit trees as well, that have largely been cashews and citrus and guavas, and you know, none of that stuff is native except for, you know, Asia, where it originally came from long time ago. So it's a bit of a balancing act. And then the other thing I would throw in is that oftentimes, like I mentioned earlier, when a zone has been completely deforested, the growing system, it's drier, you don't have as much shade, and stuff can't grow as well. So you need to find stuff that can tolerate the sunlight. We are lucky in Africa because we have a lot of acacia species that can do that, but we do lean on Sesbania, Gliricidia, Lucena, other species that are either originally from Latin America or originally from kind of India of sorts. And these species may have been in Senegal already for hundreds of years. But when we kind of say the native, non-native, I mean, you know, if it was just introduced 50 years ago, well, we weren't the ones, but some of these things are kind of propagated. So
if I could give my perspective on that, I mean, several of us here are part of a native plant society, and I'm kind of the leader of that native plant society. And I've thought about this, and I thought, you know, non-natives aren't always a problem, for one thing. And if we could take our agricultural land and have some mix of native and non-native trees and that are productive, then there will be, if we could do that on a large scale, there would be a whole lot more wildlife habitat.
Yeah, I got to share a couple quick things.
Yeah.
We see not every zone was blessed with awesome diversity to eat and consume, right. You know, and some places just don't have as great agricultural diversity. So you got to bring the good varieties in. But by using a limited amount of diversity, just a few different types of pioneer trees, what we're able to do is to cool off the land, and beneath them, you'll see the return of the native diversity. So bush mangoes, we might be familiar here with the shea nut, the shea butter or shea nut tree that goes in lotions and shampoo. It's a West African thing that they make a lotion type thing out of. That's a type of hardwood. These bush mangoes, that's not a mango that we're familiar with, but it's a bush mango, and other native fruit trees that you know, evolved in the understory of other trees. Now they're struggling to grow, and if you just go and plant them, they will not survive. They do not like that. But if you plant the pioneer species in the first year, they go up, they bounce up 3 to 6 feet. Then the other things will start to return underneath. So we call it like a system.
I remember you said I was listening to your book today, and you said that, we've intervened a lot in nature, and you're describing a situation where there's desertification is because humans have intervened, and we have to continue to intervene. And that might mean using non-native species to create a situation where, native and not, where food production can grow,
Yeah, and also because sometimes it's a non-native thing might give you a fruit or a nut or a berry that's going to give you something valuable while you're waiting for the longer term things to come online. So people had asked about how do we accelerate, benefits for farmers, and I think picking the right things that are going to fruit soon or fruit in the first year is important. You can't the native biodiversity. Oftentimes, one of the reasons why it's struggling is because it takes 10, 20 years to start fruiting. It takes 12 years for the tamarind to start fruiting. So it's, it's hard to get into the tamarind business knowing that you're gonna have to wait a dozen years. So
one thing that kind of a story I've been listening to with Mark Shepard in Wisconsin. Not sure if you're familiar with him, but he talks about growing chestnuts. And of course the chestnut was knocked out by the chestnut blight. And if you're going to have a tree that's resistant to the chestnut blight, it has to be 2% Chinese chestnut. And so you have to incorporate that 2% genetic material in to make it a tree that will survive. And then you have, some chestnuts are cold hardy, and like Chinese chestnuts are not cold hardy. So you have to mix and balance your native and your non-native within that species.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot about, I think he grows hazelnuts, which is a smaller tree underneath the chestnut trees. And then sometimes you can grow blueberries and blackberries and that kind of thing. And one thing he talks, go ahead.
Yeah, we're cautious of the diversity. You're right. You need good diversity around these. And when some of these varieties become too commercial and they're grown in monocrops, then if there is a blight, I mean, it just wipes through these things, or a beetle. Sometimes there's a beetle and it goes through the stand. What I do see, we see a lot of avocados being planted around the world right now. And even in zones where they're relatively new, I see a lot in East Africa. And I'm warning people that if you can't just keep planting avocados and all of a sudden I hear that there's different types of blight problems or some other fungal problems. I forget the name off the top of my head. That are attacking avocados in the U.S. and in Florida now, and they're and at some point, if you're planting them in high density in other places, it's going to find a way to get noticed. Right.
Well, when I heard about the locust problems in Africa, I was thinking, there's a lot that I don't know, but I think that if you have more of a diversity in your bio, more of a diversity in the natural elements, and more of a diversity in your agriculture, then monocrops are a prescription for pest outbreaks.
Sure.
It's like it's a perfect scenario for pest outbreaks. Yeah.
It's a buffet for the bad insects, and we've seen it with different types of leaf hoppers and other things, and the army worm. We hear a lot about army worms, and they've just kind of hopped all around the world until they've finally kind of reached everywhere, and then people just have to keep reverting to more and more potent chemical solutions on it. So
can you tell us some more stories about families who have had success, going from, just barely making it under the monocrop system, and then Trees for the Future comes in and coaches them on how to do a forest garden, and then things get better because they not only have more to eat, they have more nutrition, and also they have a steadier income.
Our whole system is really designed to guide thousands of people through that same process. And there's oftentimes some similarity among the forest gardens across an entire zone. So in a place like in Senegal in the peanut basin, where for decades people have been farming peanuts, you'll see that a consistent set of trees will help a family. And one family I've loved, and I'm working on putting together a bit of a piece with pictures and video together. I'm going to share it on Instagram over the next week. Is Moore Loom. And Moore is a guy that is, he's kind of quiet. He breaks into a big smile every once in a while, but he looks very serious. And when I first met him, he had his relatively new wife. They had a young baby, and I was out in the field and visiting him, and he had just joined the program. And it was about a month ago. It's more May, or end of June now. It's more May, hot, dry. I'm out in the field with him, and he was describing the life of a peanut farmer that I've heard many times, but he was particularly remote. And I remember how intense the sun was that day, and how caked his whole field was just from the trampling of livestock that had walked through, and the sun baking it. And thinking with him and sitting with him in his field, like, oh, you've got a young kid, you've got a wife, like you're gonna, like, there's nothing in this field. And I had seen, over 1,000 farmers go through the program. So happy to kind of put myself in Moore's position. In your average village where he worked, I mean, his wife is pulling water from a well 90 feet deep. She's walking to pick firewood and collect, any animal if they had a goat at the house. And she's, working overtime in the fields as well as a peanut farmer. The wife of a peanut farmer is just a really difficult, time. So between Moore and his wife and kind of meeting them, then I got to come back a year and a half later. And they had learned, so right now is kind of nursery time. The trees will be planted by August. And then I got to come back, and the trees that had just been planted when I first saw them, now we're up about head high. And the cashews start coming up. And I got out with him in the second year when I visited him, and his first guava tree started fruiting. And you should have seen like the big smile ear to ear. And then you fast forward, and he's got 180 cashew trees and orange trees throughout his field. It's surrounded by this thick acacia nilotica living fence. It's a thorny acacia tree that goes all the way around this big field. He's got these big cashew trees. And he's got a lot of mangoes. He's got oranges. I mentioned the guavas. I was there when he had his first fruit. And so you can kind of see just by the sheer volume of fruits and vegetables that he's producing out of it. And it's layered too. It used to be kind of like, it looked like the surface of the moon. Now it's layered and all these things. So what was really exciting and underscored, his kind of passion for what we're doing and the value of it is, I went back 3 years later, in the third year, then I went back in the fourth year. So I got a good time, lapse view. Moore and his wife have planted 3 forest gardens now. So we helped him with the first one, and then he planted a second one twice as big. And then the last time I saw him, he was working on the third one as well. And he's really taken it off. His neighbors, joke about how he's always on his horse cart running stuff to the market. He's got a horse cart now that he's been able to invest in, and he's a little bit farther out than a lot of our other families. But I'll share his story on Instagram. I've got some pictures of year 1 when there was really nothing there, and then kind of going back year 2, 3, 4. You mentioned Gay Cisse in my book. She was my homestay mother, and she went through a similar type of transformation. And our program is very much designed specifically, we're always trying to help women more and more and more. I think investing in African women helps make sure a lot of the benefits flow down to the kids, that their school clothes, that their pencils and pens are being bought for school, and that a lot of the investment is coming back into the family. So we recognize the role of men and women and families together. It's a family program, but we're very conscious of women's participation in the program. And so Gay Cisse, my homestay mother, I saw up close with her the many, many different ways that women are really very much responsible for the management of natural resources across a landscape. But we talked about water earlier, picking water, fetching water, pulling water, being at the stream. They're in charge of the animals oftentimes and overseeing them and making sure they're being fed or food is being collected, and weeding and clearing fields. And so kind of working through women and training women is a pretty important part of the program. With my homestay mother, was able to make most of her money from a variety of different things, like cashews and pigeon peas, hot peppers and lettuce, all kinds of different things that were growing sustainably together in her forest garden. So the days of pulling water from a well are done. She's been able to install running water into her household compound now, so she doesn't have to pull water from a well that's incredibly deep. She's been able to invest in some more livestock. She still makes money from lettuce and hot peppers that she grows in her forest garden. And here we are 15, almost 20 years later, and the forest garden has been able to kind of, sustain through time. So it's a pleasure for me, pushing 20 years planting forest gardens in Africa, to be able to go back and visit the farmers and visit the families. And in the beginning, meet people like Moore Loom, who were just trying to make ends meet. And then we go back and I sit with them, shake hands, and we sit under a tree and be willing to taste a papaya if they insist on slicing a fresh papaya from a tree or something like that too. So it's nice to see the successes.
John, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left, and we're going to do some more questions, but
Sure.
Give our listeners again a chance to know how they can get in contact with you and follow up, and how they can contribute.
Sure. I would invite everybody to join us at trees.org and find a way to donate or get involved. We have volunteers and ambassadors who help. We have a large social media following, and we're on all kinds of different social media platforms, Instagram and Facebook, and we send out e-newsletters to people updating our supporters and the larger community. If people are ready to get started, and if they know somebody who's serving or working abroad or working as a missionary or working with an organization in Africa, we also have a training platform at training.trees.org. And that's a website where people can learn to do what we do and to really get involved in whatever, wherever they are. And it's designed for people working throughout the developing world. So we're happy to offer that as well. We're trying to solve global problems, and we can't do it alone. So we try to create all of our stuff open source and share it with everyone. We've got a number of people doing some fundraisers for us through the summer. With the COVID crisis and with all the other challenges, there's plenty of ways to help out here in July and in August and through the rest of the summer, as we try to keep finding new supporters and getting the word out.
Let me ask about migration. So you talk about how, we spend something like $17,000 per detainee when we're detaining people at the border. If we could take that and invest it instead in helping people do forest gardens in Honduras, for example, where a lot of immigrants are coming from, then we could, with all the money that we save from that, we could continue to reinvest in forest gardens. And one way that you start that whole story is talking about in Africa, a lot of people are trying to get to Europe, and in the village, it's like, here's how you get to Spain, and
Sure.
and trying to sneak away and get to Spain. Grass always greener, and the grass is not always greener when you get there. But we have, we're only going to have more problems with migration as climate change makes the situation impossible in the home country. Talk about how forest gardens and your program with Trees for the Future could help, be a better investment with our funding.
Absolutely. And you're right that we have a similar process, whether you're looking at kind of failed systems in Central America, failed farming systems, people struggling, people migrating, looking for better opportunities. The experience in Africa as well, we see a lot of failed farming systems, communities struggling and looking to migrate northward. And in both scenarios, what we find is that I've done focus groups with many African communities and learned that the threshold of finding a job or finding income in your community to no longer have the desire to want to migrate to Italy or Spain or to go northward is actually quite low. People are not looking for, I was trying to put, as an American, I was trying to put numbers to, it's like, what is it going to take? They need is it a $20,000 a year job? Is it a $50,000 a year job? Like what is going to, and I found out that for a lot of our communities in Senegal, it was $75 a month. They said if they could find a way to make $75 a month, and I was talking with 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, the people, especially in Africa, who are, I think, comprise the lion's share of the population who are making the migrant journey northward into Africa and trying to get across into, and if they could find $75 a month, $100 a month, that would be enough to warrant satisfaction in their life as a young man, usually a young man, to say that, you know, that's, and we can do that with a forest garden. So that's a big push of ours. Reversely, we have a lot of participants. So we have a lot of young people who want money. They're looking for the best way to make money. We also have people on the other end of the journey, Hart, and this is really incredible. And it's a testament to our program, and I'm really happy to be able to help these communities, and that we're working with the United Nations and the IOM, the International Organization of Migrants right now, who, after young people have decided for whatever reason they got to make the migrant journey, they found themselves in refugee camps in Italy and Spain and other places, then they're being repatriated back to their country. We are able to work with them rather than in a preventive way that
Right.
you described. We're able to work with them for and help each one not just plant forest gardens, but help their neighbors plant forest gardens and have better nutrition and prosperity and income and livelihood for themselves and for their, you know, the community around them. So I'm excited as we get out of the COVID crisis to get over to Senegal and to work with this new batch of trainers that we have. And then just to round out the question, the Central American experience is very similar. I've been to many of the degraded hillsides throughout Central America that have been degraded from maize monocultures and a lot of cattle walking up and down the hillsides. And there's coffee and there's other crops too, but there's been a lot of deforestation. There's a lot of, you brought up water. There's a lot of water shortages. I have been in the cities while the fruit agribusiness has all the water and they're irrigating their bananas, but the town has a water shortage and nobody can drink water, or, you know, so I've seen the inequities of the food system as poor people get pushed around and marginalized. Yeah. So,
well, and our foreign policy is such that, you know, we somehow make it so that a few rich people get to create plantations and drive people off of the land that they had previously used to grow their food. Yeah. And if the, you know, if those a few rich people make more money, then that's thought to be good for the economy because they're just looking at GDP. Sure. But look at, you know, look at all the people that have been dispossessed from their land. Sometimes they go to the cities to provide cheap labor for manufacturing. Sometimes they stay to provide cheap labor for farming. They're exposed to pesticides, which are illegal in the United States. It's a flat mess. Don't get me started. Sure. But you, a couple of things in a few minutes that we have. Yeah. You were talking about how climate change is a symptom of a broken food system. I wanted to ask you about that, and also SDG, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, big media campaign, all the best intentions, but they didn't really understand. You talk about a Celtic knot. Sure. You know, several related issues that they didn't know how to really work with that, but a forest garden helps to solve those problems.
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate the questions. Climate change is tough. And I think in my experience, looking at the root causes of deforestation and land degradation and seeing how farming and agriculture is a big driver there, as I unpack the climate crisis and look at the carbon footprint of our food production, when you think of the carbon footprint of all the chemicals from the mining of the phosphate, the NPK, the things as they're applied in the field, the tractors running up and down the field as well, the transporting of the food. Oftentimes we hear refrigeration is one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas. Well, it's probably refrigeration of food and meat and ice cream and milk and meat and stuff like that. So again, food system, you know, is such a massive contributor, and the transportation and the trucks. And so oftentimes you see contributors to climate change and you see it broken down by industry, but I think you see how the food system just cuts across all the industries, and you see as you go from production to moving it to cooling it to selling it to eating it to finally wrapping it in some styrofoam, or finally getting it out to the grill. There's so many different points of carbon and other kind of greenhouse gases that get emitted from our food system. And so I think, and as you, climate change is affecting us in so many different ways. I think that the most immediate and direct way that humans can address it is by changing what we're eating and planting a lot of trees very quickly. But with that, there's a lot of talk about planting 1 trillion trees, and will 1 trillion trees help stave off climate change? And I want to be clear that trees are absolutely essential, but if we plant 1 trillion trees, but don't stop all of the toxic, destructive farming techniques that are burning and spraying and dead zones, if we don't stop the bad techniques, but plant 1 trillion trees, we're still doomed. But if we can plant these trees in ways that reduce, a lot of the negative impacts that we've talked about here today, then I think we've got a chance. I think a lot of those trees will take a deep breath in and offset a lot of the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere as well.
Well, Vandana Shiva talks about how this migration, we're taught that the migration from country to city is progress. And she talks about how, we really need to reverse that. There's nothing inevitable about a migration from country to city. We need more people who are, tending smaller plots. So
food systems can learn a lot from tree planting systems. So Trees for the Future, we've planted nearly 200 million trees, and we've had to do it with a lot of people. And at the end of the day, the most efficient way to do it is not to produce a big, massive tree nursery that has millions and millions of seedlings, and to do it efficient.
Yeah.
You can't, because you end up having
industrialize it.
That's not the way. Decentralize it.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of small producers spread across the countryside, producing locally, delivering locally. You don't have to move megatons of dirt. You don't have to get megatons of gas. You don't have the intensification.
Every acorn, every walnut is a seed for a tree. Gather up do y'all do, some of your planting from seed?
Sure. Yeah.
You wouldn't just humor me, would you?
No, absolutely.
Do you use some seeds and some seedlings?
We do both. We train farmers to grow their own seedlings. So we'll start from seed on just about everything. Sometimes there's cuttings that we might do for a specific species, but it's usually propagated. Things are propagated by seed, and we train every farmer on how to germinate those seeds and how to get them up. And the tough acacia trees need a little bit more hot water and other things to get them sprouting, and some of the other fruit trees might need some grafting. We also teach people how to graft them and graft that real juicy fruit, on top of your fruit tree as well. So we teach people how to produce them all kinds of different ways.
There's only a couple minutes left, but you talked about how Walmart and McDonald's are getting behind something called climate smart agriculture. What's up with that?
Yeah, and we also wanted to talk about the SDGs that you brought up as well. Climate smart agriculture is we talked about agroforestry today and the forest garden system, and each zone, whether you're in Maryland or Kentucky, or whether you're in the Caribbean, whether you're in West Africa, East Africa, in every zone, every kind of region around the world there's some trends. There's usually a set of 2, 3, 4, 5 trends that we're seeing because of climate change. And they might be warming trends, drying trends, wet trends, hot, cold, fluctuations, more serious storms. Sometimes it's influx of different insects or invasive species because of the heating trends or moisture trends or other things like that. Sometimes it's fungus and other mold problems that are entering into new areas because of the warming trend or a humidity trend or something like that. So what our challenge is working with farmers is to do enough homework to try to figure out what the trends are in any place. And usually what we'll see, we're seeing certainly drying trends. We're seeing droughts more frequently in East and West Africa. But now we have to plan a farming system in East Africa that's ready for a drought every 3 years. So when we pick the species that we're picking and the diversity in it, we expect it to really not rain, one of the years. And so we need the species that are going to be hardy enough and tough enough. Other times you're thinking about when is it the worst? It's the worst, like right now, these dust storms that are coming all the way across the Atlantic. If you're in the field, when you come to me to Senegal, it hits you in the face. You know what direction the nastiest, driest storms come from. So our climate smart agriculture is going to say, well, on this side of the field, let's put some pretty thick windbreaks so that when these storms do come, they don't damage, all the stuff that you have inside. So water, soil quality, the storms, wind, moisture. We take the bugs, the new types of bugs that are prevalent, and insects and pests. We take all that to an account. And we do it in very simple ways. We're just asking farmers, sitting down in groups of 25 and hearing from farmers. We try to shut up a little bit and ask good questions. And farmers have been doing this their whole lives. So they're experts on what they do. And just kind of draw that information out from them. We can inform climate trends and help them come up with solutions that address those trends that they themselves are struggling with.
And McDonald's and Walmart have co-opted that term for something that means something entirely different. I wish we had time to talk about that, but we don't.
It happens with all the terms, yeah.
You can contact John Leary by going to trees.org. It's so cool that you have that domain name, trees.org.
We're happy to represent it. We try to represent it well. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us. I wish we had more time. Thanks to our audience as well. And stay on, and we will talk a little bit more after we finish the recording. Thank you to our studio audience for joining us on Let's Talk. This has been, we've had our special guest, John Leary. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you, everyone.